When people talk about the arrival of American art in Santa Fe, they usually start with tuberculosis, and there are many famous stories about the earliest Anglo artists who came here. The most famous story is probably that of Carlos Vieira, who came here when he was sick in 1904. You hear a lot about Edgar Hewitt, who started the Art Museum, and you hear a lot about famous New York artists like Robert Henry. However, there was one woman named Eva Scott Fényes who got here before any of them, and she brought with her some considerable influence when it came to bringing American artists to Santa Fe for the first time.
This is Eva Scott Fényes. She moved to Santa Fe in 1889 with her daughter, Leonora. In an era when most Anglos were coming to Santa Fe because they had tuberculosis, Eva showed up healthy and ready to get to work. She came here to get a divorce. In 1890, Eva filed with the territory of New Mexico, and because her husband William was unwilling to make the journey, she was granted sole and exclusive custody of her daughter Leonora. This was the reason she chose to come to New Mexico.
It's incredibly significant because the dates, everything that she has recorded with the meticulousness that she recorded, the timeline, that predates Carlos Vieira by at least a decade. She was already had the jump on him by at least a decade. And it also speaks to, she had fallen in love with the land enough for her life's purpose to become this documentarian, right? I think she deserves credit for recording the Pueblo style, you know, the architecture here. And I think it's just people don't know about the depth of the material that she created and painted. And then also to be a woman artist, a woman patron, artist, photographer, real estate developer, like a true patron of the arts, acknowledging that artists were already here and they were worth celebrating as artists in their own right. And there was this wonderful patron who saw that.
The first thing Eva did when she got to Santa Fe was purchase land and build a house for her and Leonora to live. Then she bought more land and built at least one other house, which she rented out for income. She was a compulsive photographer documenting the territorial period of New Mexico, and she was also a talented painter, making countless watercolors of Santa Fe and the surrounding pueblos. By 1900, Eva had established herself as the original patron of the Santa Fe art colony.
It's been a conversation within myself and within my family, and also on the street, if you will, my entire life, that you hear of the Georgia O'Keeffe, you hear of the Lujan Dodge House, you hear of all of these other artists that came after the fact, and she's left out of the conversation. So there are female artists that get representation, but they came so much later. And then you also hear of the Pinturas, you hear of the Fremont Ellis, you hear of the Will Schuster. Then you look at her archive, and they were all hanging out. They were friends. They were all at the same parties. They were all rubbing elbows, making art, living this art scene. And the only understanding of why she kind of got left out of that conversation of the early artists maybe is because she's female. Maybe it's because she didn't shine the spotlight on herself because she didn't need to. I mean, I didn't know Eva, never met her. I think that she was a trailblazer. I mean, this is this lady that like divorces her husband and moves to Santa Fe in the late 1800s, and he was a military man. Who does that? Like, that's bold, that's brazen.
think part of the reason that Eva was not as well known here perhaps is that, you know, so many of the people that would have known her are no longer here, whereas my grandmother and my mother lived here a lot longer, I think, and also they were known by people that even are now are still living, you know what I'm saying? And so I think she's just kind of been dropped off. I think it would behoove people to know them, to know what they did accomplish, and especially for this day and age, you know, the Me Too and everything else going on, that, you know, these were some very strong women, capable women, and not enough of that is celebrated, regardless of who that person might be. And so I think in that sense it would be wonderful, and that's why I think that this Acequia Madre House and the Whisk and all of that is wonderful. I think it's wonderful.
One of the things that makes Eva's story so difficult to piece together is that she was always on the move. She was constantly traveling around the world. She had a house in Santa Fe and she had a house in Pasadena. And today her collections and archives are actually split in half. Half of them are stored at her California house, which is now the Pasadena Museum of History, and the other half is stored at her Santa Fe house, which is now the headquarters for the Women's International Study Center. But when you look at her collection as a whole, it tells an incredible story about how Santa Fe started to develop as a hub for American art. The archive itself was built upon by her daughter and her granddaughter, and its contents span from about 1860 all the way to 1999.
I was overwhelmed. Both the scale of the collection and the sizes of the pieces are incredibly impressive. And I think it speaks to what a friendship they must have had, because the collection itself, because of its size and scope, feels like a friendship collection. It feels like the kind of collection that would have happened between artists. You know, your birthday's coming up, we celebrated something great, we had an anniversary, look, I made you this, you know. There's something heartfelt about a collection that size. And it's incredible to see.
It's amazing what they saved. I mean, you see things of it. We spent $1.20 for a tire. I don't know, you know, that kind of stuff. You see all these receipts and it's like, why are you saving this? Like, I have boxes and boxes of stuff, and I said, just throw it out. You know, and fortunately nobody listened to me, because now everybody's really appreciating and enjoying it. But you look at the price of what stuff was, or, you know, what they paid for a house in Pasadena, or what, it's so amazing. And, you know, I'm one of these people that more looks in the future. I've never been a really historical kind of person. So I'm learning to appreciate all of that. And I love the fact that I could go back to Pasadena and see the house there, you know, or just 614. There's another house that I've always loved. I've always loved this house. La Loma, you know, all of those places. I'm grateful that I can do that and that other people can share.
When I was young, that house, 614 Acequia Madre, it's just grandma's house. So to me now, it's still grandma's house. I would go there for Thanksgiving. I'd go there for Christmas. We'd open presents and under the tree. We'd do the Fajalito walk down Canyon Road from grandma's house. Now I know that the collection was purely what they were interested in collecting, because it was either their friends' art or it was traditional art that they thought was important to preserve. I mean, I remember Grandma would always want to go to the dances. So we were to go to Isleta, we would go to Cochiti, we would go to San Ildefonso. If she was invited to a dance, we would go to a dance and Grandma would get art. As an artist, I do it with my friends now, where I always want to support them. All of us as artists always want to like support our buddies. I mean, I'm wearing a belt that was made by my buddy Carlos Calles. I'm wearing a belt buckle that was made by my buddy Danny Hart. I mean, we do that in artist communities, and I don't think I got that from them. I think it's just what artists do. And I think that might be a part that gets lost a little bit, that these women were business women, but they were artists too. And that's just what artists do for one another, is we support each other's work.
Eva's daughter was a botanist and an author, and her granddaughter was a painter and an entrepreneur. And the whole family played a major role in the way Santa Fe started to develop into the art capital that we know it as today. And when you look through the family's collection, it's pretty obvious that they were friends with just about literally everyone. All three generations of women carried on a tradition of asking these friends to make self-portraits, and they would compile these self-portraits into guest books. When you flip through the Santa Fe guest books, it's like looking through a who's who of the early Santa Fe art colony. You see Gerald Cassidy, Olive Rush, Thomas V. Hill, Fred Cabote, Gustav Bauman, Sheldon Parsons. It's a very long list, but one portrait in particular really reveals just how influential of a figure Eva really was, and that portrait is John Sloan. So when John Sloan came here, he was pretty much already like a rock star. He was part of the Ashcan School in New York City, and he is considered to be one of the most famous artists to move to Santa Fe to be a part of the art colony. When he first came, it was 1919, and he took a road trip from New York to Santa Fe. And this is a very famous story, this road trip that he took with his best friend, artist Randall Davey. You can read about this story in just about all of the books, but the reason I'm bringing it up today is because when you look very closely at the John Sloan self-portrait, it is signed Santa Fe, September of 1919. And in the background, there's a tiny little figure on horseback labeled R. Davey. Now, this is pretty significant because if they had just gotten here in 1919, and one of the first things that Sloan felt compelled to do was put his portrait into Eva's guest book, that suggests that she was a pretty important figure, and he felt the need to make himself known to her or pay his respect. So not only was Eva the first American artist to move to Santa Fe and recognize it as a place for art, but she remained a central figure of the art colony all the way through the Roaring '20s.
In 1921, Eva rented the infamous El Saguan building on Canyon Road. It was here that she gathered with the Santa Fe art colony, remaining at the center of one of the most remarkable stories in American art history. In 1925, Eva and her family started construction on their mansion at Acequia Madre and Delgado Street. In addition to the main building, they also built 5 other houses on the property. They were responsible for the creation of San Antonio Street. Eva was also instrumental in the construction of other houses around town. She lent money to Sheldon Parsons, who built his famous house in Cerro Gordo Street.
So to not only be classically trained, like she was, but to also understand where the future is going without isolation from the schools before, is makes her a really interesting collector and patron, because she's not eschewing the European schools, which were the top-notch schools. She's not forgetting about what came before. And yet she's recognizing what is special. She's recognizing Maria Martinez and her whole family. That whole pueblo is doing something never before done. She's recognizing that California Impressionists are doing things that haven't been done. That's special. You know, they're not modernists, they're not rejecting what's come before. They're taking French Impressionism and making it American, making it something new. And if that's not a patron with a vision, I don't know what is.
You know, if you're asking about Eva Fényes deserving more credit for what she did, yeah. They were here early. They were bringing people from LA. They were bringing artists from New York. They were showing people this landscape. And she doesn't get the accolades because she didn't necessarily, I don't think, need them. She knew what she was doing. I mean, they painted all of these missions from here to California as basically a historic preservation log of these missions that they knew were going to deteriorate to the ground. And I don't think they did it because they wanted anyone in the future to be like, oh, that's so amazing. They did it because they knew it was kind of an important thing to do, and they wanted to share it with people from the future. I mean, even the recording of native languages. I don't know if you've seen those pictures they recorded native languages on cylinder disc. Even back then, they were like, this language could be lost, and it was just something that they thought was important to do. You find something cool, you want to share it with anybody and everybody that you can, and they had the means to share it, and they had the group of friends in the social circle at the time of painters that they wanted to share it with.
Eva died in 1930, but her artistic legacy, her art collection, and her sprawling business were carried on by her daughter and granddaughter. A few years after her death, Leonora purchased a ranch in La Cienega called La Loma. It was the family's personal retreat, and they continued to buy property in the area for the next several decades. Much later, her daughter, Leonora Frances, married a Finnish diplomat named George Paloheimo, and together they decided to use the ranch in La Cienega to create an open-air history museum. In 1972, they established El Rancho de las Golondrinas. Today, the collections and archives built by these three incredible women remain intact and are stored at the Acequia Madre House in Santa Fe and the Pasadena Museum of History in California. Contained within these walls, there are infinite treasures that provide a profound new perspective on the history of art in the American West.